we were told that it wouldn't be easy, it was only through first-hand experience that the truth of this sentiment solidified in our consciousness as a shared affirmation. And yet, here we are, at the end of 5 years, at the culmination and the commencement of a journey of learning and growth, bruised but beaming, uncertain but hopeful for what lies ahead. And it is this spirit that Paglaong embodies. It is a reminder to continue hoping, while also striving toward the realization of the future we aspire for ourselves and for the community that we endeavor to serve. A sense of idealism, surely, lies within the heart of each of us, to have chosen this institution as the place within which we'll train to be doctors. Or, for that reason, to be chosen by this institution, having been thoroughly probed in the admission interviews for our reasons for pursuing medicine. Within the heart of each of those hopeful, starry-eyed applicants was a genuine desire to help. But 5 years of arduous training challenged the tenacity of our convictions, our belief that something could be done, or that we could be the ones to do it. For many of us, it was a mere few months into our first semester that we experienced our first failed exam. I probably don't have to specify which. I still vividly remember scanning the first page of that questionnaire and thinking that I would skip it for now because I didn't know the answers. And then flipping to the next page and thinking the same. And then I get to the end of the packet and it dawns with unmitigated certainty. I'm screwed. It makes for a funny story now, but in that moment, or in the moment we received our scores, it was surely a shock to our systems. A failed exam in the record of students whose academic merit had gotten them there in the first place. And yet we persevered. We shrugged off our disappointment and nagging sense of self-doubt and refused to let one failed mark deter us from achieving our goals or from continuing to believe in ourselves. Until the next failed exam, though that didn't stop us either. Then came the most daunting challenge that we had had to face in med school, a predicament that none of us foresaw, but that we all inevitably had to adapt to in order to move forward. When COVID started making the headlines of global news outlets, it felt like a distant thing. Even as we read and saw pictures of entire cities being placed on lockdown, COVID seemed like an abstract entity, one that we, in wishful denial or naivete, thought might leave us untouched. Quite a few of us were still envisioning the holidays we would take over the summer, trips we would say we'd earn at the conclusion of a hectic year. The closure of foreign borders was thought of, or hoped to be, merely a temporary measure, which would somehow right itself in time for our vacations to those intended destinations. And when, on that fateful Monday afternoon, it started to circulate in our classrooms that the mayor was suspending classes for a week, that was all we thought it would be, a week, during which we could spend time with our families and suspend thoughts of blood gas equations or the physiology of cough. But ultimately, only a week. It was a whole 18 months before we'd step foot back on campus. LU5 was meant to be our first hospital year, when we would interview and examine patients at the outpatient clinics and try our hand at practical competencies. We would have started to feel less like students who only knew theory and more like actual doctors to be. And yet, what we got was a whole other year of mentally conjuring patients from paper cases and sending a prayer that the rooster next door doesn't crow while we're reciting. Everyone did their best. The faculty, who had, until then, simply prepared slides and delivered their lectures in class, now had to scour their houses for an acceptable background, set up their cameras, and record themselves speaking, hoping, like us, that our pet doesn't bark or a car doesn't honk outside. They had to figure out how to sync these recordings with their slideshows and then upload the products online. Also, we could study the topic at 3 in the morning if we so chose. The internet is fast as that time of day, we would reason. Or our sleep schedules had by then been distorted past social convention. Looking back on it now, we realize how much we had in common with our professors. How they too had to navigate unfamiliar terrain and do their best within the confines of their schedule and circumstance. So let this also be a thank you to our faculty for choosing to keep teaching and for weathering the pandemic with us. But what a struggle it had been. Many of us had not lived at home for longer than the summer since we graduated from high school. And the times that we were at home, we had come to associate with rest and carefree comfort. Relocating to our family homes amid online classes meant that we now had to turn our homes into places of productivity, while at the same time fulfilling our roles as children and siblings. I would be hard-pressed to believe that any one of us did not at some point sign into a lecture while also doing chores, loath as we may be to admit that in the company of those who gave the said lectures. The online setup really was, at its core, a juggling act. And perhaps the most challenging of feats was juggling the drive to keep going with the doubt that we weren't enough equipped. It was hard to bear both the knowledge of what batches before us could already do at our level and the sadly inarguable fact that the same could not be possible for us. So when we were set to return, finally, for face-to-face clerkship, we cycled through a multitude of conflicting feelings. We were eager to break the monotony of the past 2 years, but also hesitant to diverge from our established routines. We were thrilled to reunite with our classmates, but also sad to part with our families. We were glad to go on duties and manage patients, but also worried that we didn't know how. Well, we were going to learn. Our block's first duty was in neurology, and on our group's first night, there wasn't even an intern on duty with us. We went from writing case papers to suddenly monitoring an entire ward of patients, actual patients, to say nothing of the procedures that we also had to figure out. I'm sure in those days we were referring patients for temperatures of 37.6, and every referral was a genuine plea to please come to our rescue. Clerkship was a trial by fire, if there ever was one. And all that year, what we thought to console ourselves was the idea that if we couldn't do something, we could always defer to the interns, until we had become the interns. We faced our final year of med school with trepidation and thrill. There was still a lingering doubt that we weren't ready. Only this time, we had heard that voice in our heads enough times that we knew how to subdue it. We braved through that first month without clerks or PGIs. And when we did finally meet the rest of our block, we acted their learned guides, though we too were still towing the waters and could do with a guide ourselves. And if we were to discuss trials and tests of faith, the past year certainly was not one. Internship was taxing in all aspects. At times, we would be so drained that the only thought sustaining us was how close we were to the end. The whole year had been a countdown to where we're standing now. But the closer we were to the end of medical school, the more urgent the need to answer. Where do I go now? Or even, am I where I should be? Internship, more than any other year, opened our eyes to the realities of the healthcare system and a career in the medical field. At the ER, we received patients who traveled distances and days because other hospitals had turned them down or were outside their means. We saw patients with masses that they'd known about and literally bore for years, fearing what they'd hear if they were to see a doctor. It might be cancer, or it might cost you all the money you have. Patients came in with already poor prognosis, and all the while we would wonder if there really was anything more we could do, short of a miracle. And people did, at times, come for miracles. What do you say to a person who tells you that they're placing their life in your hands? What do you say to a family who pleads for 2 more minutes? Please, continue compressions for 2 more minutes. And what do you say to yourself as you walk away from the 3rd code of the night with 7 more hours to go? Sometimes there aren't any words, and there aren't any answers, or not ones that would suffice, not ones that we could know at the moment. But through all the uncertainty, frustration, and fear, we allow ourselves to hope. To hope that we will one day discover the answers, that things will get better, and that we can be brave enough to work through the fear. All we need to do is to look back and see how far we've come. Look around and see that we aren't alone in pursuing our dreams. Look inside and see that we have what it takes, and then nurture the dimming whisper of hope that has allowed us to arrive where we are. Then we look forward and we take one more step. 2023, we've made it all this way. Now, let's keep making history and keep making change. Padayon.